Welcome back to Proxy, everybody, and today we're going to be re-examining indirect fire and asking the crucial question. Is it back, or did it never leave to begin with? And truthfully, when Pariah Nexus came out, I thought indirect fire had all but been killed. However, since then, I've seen many successful lists using indirect fire, even with the nerfs. And for the Eldar specifically, whom I thought indirect fire was dead on arrival when Pariah Nexus came into play, I've been pleasantly surprised by the fact that D cannons have been appearing in competitive lists once again, or just quite frankly haven't left. Which I think has kind of shown us once and for all that indirect fire is here to stay. Hitting on 4s, 5s, and 6s is not enough to basically prevent people from using it in competitive play because of the value it brings to the table. Having said that, let's go and talk about what we're going to be looking at in today's video. So first, we're going to review the stats, weapons, and special rules of the D cannon specifically. We are going to be going over its strengths and weaknesses, its combos and synergies, the denial power of support weapons and indirect fire weapons in general, and lastly, how to use support weapons in an Eldar army and how to make the most out of them. So looking at the base stats of the support weapon, it is very slow at movement 3, and it is very fragile with toughness 6, a 4-up save, and 5 wounds. This makes it even more fragile than the Viper. And of course, as you guys know, the Viper is a very fragile vehicle. It also boasts one of the lowest OC for any vehicle in pretty much any army out there at OC 1. Even the Viper has more OC at 2. However, as far as its ranged weapons go, they can take one of the most powerful weapons in the game, which is the D cannon. D3 attacks, strength 16, AP -4, damage D6 +2, plus blast, heavy, devastating wounds, and indirect fire make this one of the best weapon platforms in the entire game. Especially when you combine this with unparalleled mastery for a reroll to hit and wound, and fate dice. This weapon can be one of the best answers to eliminating hard targets in the game. The other weapon options just simply aren't as good. Of course, every platform comes with a shuriken catapult that can tag targets to trigger the unit's ability. The Shadow Weaver is really good at killing light infantry, but again, you're paying a lot of points for that with blast, D6 +2 attacks, strength 6, AP nothing, and damage 1. You're really not getting a lot of mileage out of that weapon for the cost. Despite the fact that it does have devastating wounds, it's just not going to be doing the damage that its points cost would suggest. The Vibro Cannon is the next weapon, and of course, it belongs in the family planning section of your local drugstore. I've said this before. It is probably one of the worst profiles in the entire codex, if not the entire game. And you're basically spending 135 points for something that will die to the counterattack and will only kill an average of 1 Space Marine per turn, if that. As far as its melee weapons go, it has the close combat weapon, 2 attacks, weapon skill 3+, strength 3, AP 0, damage 1. It's not going to do well in close combat, let's just put it that way. Its ability, however, is really good. A single target hit by the weapons of this unit suffer -1 to hit for 1 round. That includes ranged and close combat. So it's a really good way of neutering a powerful unit in your opponent's list, as long as it's not a vehicle or monster. And the cool thing about this as well is that even if you're not firing at a vehicle or monster, if you do have line of sight to something else on the battlefield, you want to tag that with the -1 to hit, you can always shoot the Shuriken Catapult, which has an 18-inch range and can proc the ability. As far as its war gear options go, it can of course be armed with the D cannon, the Vibrator Cannon, or the Shadow Weaver. As for the points cost of this unit, it does cost 135 points, which is a pretty penny. It is very expensive for such a fragile piece, and that is because of the power of the D cannon. The other weapon options are nowhere close to the value of this cost, and that is why you will never see them get played. They were played in the very beginning of the edition when, support weapons were much cheaper, but at 135, it's just not worth it. As for the keywords, surprisingly, this thing is a vehicle, so it does have the vehicle keyword for tank shocks, which tank shock did get improved in Pariah Nexus, so you will be throwing 6 dice at your target when you charge this thing in. And the funny thing is that, before it might not even be worth it to charge, only having strength 3, only rolling 3 dice. But rolling 6 dice, you might actually want to try it. There might be some scenarios where a tank shock could actually work in your favor and actually, something your opponent might not expect. All right, so as for the strengths and weaknesses of the D cannon, let's just be honest, we're not going to talk about the other options because they're terrible. The strengths are that it can shoot out of line of sight, allowing it to threaten units that would normally be safe. I think this is the key right here, that it can, threaten a wide array of vehicles, monsters, and infantry alike, and it can do so from a safe distance and a safe position. And not only that, of course, the weapon is very powerful as well, capable of massive damage spikes with that devastating wounds and d6 plus 2 damage. However, it does have its weaknesses. It is expensive. It's almost as much as a Falcon. It is very fragile for the cost, and it has short range, and is very swingy with the new indirect fire rules. And that's the other thing, right? This thing has D3 attacks. Normally you should get 2, but there is a chance you'll get 1. And you're hitting on a 4+, which isn't exactly reliable even with a reroll. So even though this thing can really come through for you, get those big 3 attacks, hit all 3 times, wound all 3 times, and just, massively dumpster something, it can also whiff really badly. As far as its combos and synergies, Guide does slightly help it by allowing more than 1 hit reroll. This is just, in case you roll really bad on something and you really need something to die. But typically there are better guide targets. Doom helps it wound tough targets a bit easier. So anything that it's not going to wound on a 2+, being able to wound that target on a 2+ does make it more reliable. Having an Avatar of Cain or a Wraith Brick in your list to provide a safe area for them to stage is also very important. You need some sort of buffer that is going to prevent enemies from just marching up to the D cannons and destroying them wholesale. They typically want to be deployed together to maximize the damage you can deal in a select area of the board. And on top of that, they're always going to be behind ruined walls or behind obscuring terrain. So you do want to make sure that you have something strong nearby to be able to support them. Having a solitaire nearby or a fights first unit to protect them from combat is also very good because of the fact that these guys are not only terrible in combat, but they are very, very fragile. So having something that can fights first, destroy the enemy unit before they can destroy the support weapon is a handy thing to have in your back pocket. Okay, so let's talk about the denial power of support weapons and indirect fire in general. So we do have a few indirect fire options in our index. They include, of course, the D Cannon, the Night Spinner, and Dark Reapers. And among those, there is only one, the D Cannon, that is going to force your opponent to think twice about moving into their range, especially when you have them positioned well. And that is because despite the fact that indirect fire has been nerfed from hitting on a 4+ to a 3+ with D cannons, a 50-50 chance of being hit with multiple D cannons is something your opponent is not going to want to risk with their more expensive units. A single D cannon does have the potential to kill things like Land Raiders in a single round of shooting. Now, I know that's not likely, but I myself have had a scenario where a single D cannon was able to take 14 wounds off of a Land Raider in a single shooting phase. Granted, this was before the indirect fire nerf, but even so, if you roll good, you should be able to deal a significant amount of damage, and if your opponent knows the stats of the D cannon, they're going to realize that as well. And if you consider putting 2 more D cannons into the equation there, your opponent's definitely not going to step in within their threat range, right? 3 D cannons firing off 6 shots on average, hitting 4 or 5 times, wounding 4 or 5 times, forcing your opponent to take 3 or 4 armor saves at -4 AP is going to be a serious deterrent. In addition to this, indirect fire can also deal with many solo characters without lone operative who like to hide behind ruined walls and terrain, or even units that have been damaged that your opponent is now trying to hide and score objectives with. That last Space Marine Sergeant in the unit, or that Dark Eldar Archon that has seemed to roll every 2-up invul save so far this game, is now a prime target for the D cannon. And of course, you can always plug in a 6 to wound for those devastating wounds to auto kill pretty much anything you shoot at. All right, so I also want to show you guys on a diagram how much influence D-cannons can have on the course of a battle and what they can typically threaten. So in this game, we have 3 D-cannons in green. They're on the bottom left, right up to the edge of your deployment zone. And we are going to move them up to the edge of the ruins. So on the left-hand side, that left ruin just outside your deployment zone, we're going to move those 2 D-cannons up by advancing them. And then the other D-cannon on the right-hand side of that ruin, that L-shaped ruin right there, we're going to move up to the very corner of it. And what this is going to allow us to do is cover not only the left-hand side objective with our threat range, but also the middle objective. If our opponent wants to move into the middle or stage anything behind those middle ruins, and that I marked in red, they're going to have to suffer some D-cannons. Now, you will also notice that these are the most popular positions to stage fast-moving assault units, things like assault marines, assault intercessors, or even Death Company, right? Sometimes even Thunderwolf Cav. And if your opponent decides to do this, they're going to have to risk taking 3 D-cannons to the face. A unit of 6 Thunderwolf Cavalry or a full unit of Death Company is going to be reduced considerably, probably by about half their number, which will make it much easier to deal with in the subsequent turns. Especially if you have a fights first unit like the Solitaire ready to heroically intervene if the D-cannons manage to get into combat the next turn. And the Solitaire should be enough to wipe out the rest of the Space Marines that are in that unit. But not only this, but you can use the D-cannons in a way to ensure that you score on things like extend, right? Making sure that whatever units your opponent puts on those objectives are killed, and then of course you can take advantage by moving your own units up to score that secondary objective. And in turn, this is also going to force your opponent to put more units on the objectives because they're not successfully being able to capture them fully, and their primary game will suffer as a result. The only thing again, of course, is that you do need some sort of anchor unit, some sort of Avatar of Cain or Wraith Brick to make sure that your opponent can't easily get to the D-cannons. And you do need some sort of fights first unit to prevent people from just charging them and either tying them up in combat or simply destroying them. So how do you use support weapons in an Eldar army, and how do you make the most out of them? So support weapons, talking about D-cannon specifically, are a denial and board control piece that forces opponents to go where you want them to or risk taking massive damage. It also prevents your opponent from mass staging on you, which will allow you to take on their army piecemeal rather than all at once. And Eldar are very good at being able to divide up the enemy army and take it out part by part. Good positioning is also key to cover as much vital board space as possible while making sure that they are safe from direct assault, as they are extremely fragile. And again, they're only toughness 6, they have 5 wounds and a 4+ save. They're not going to survive any direct assaults. So, in conclusion, despite the nerfs, D-cannons are still very effective denial and board control pieces that are active in many competitive lists. However, I will say this, their increased cost and decreased accuracy does incentivize greater protection and volume to make up for their weaknesses. And it does also require having those supporting elements in place to ensure their long-term success. You want these things alive for the entire game, and you want to formulate a game plan around them accordingly. And this is mostly due to the fact that 3 D-cannons are going to cost you pretty much 405 points, which is a considerable chunk of your army. That's 1/5 of the available points that you have. And if you add on a Wraith Brick or an Avatar of Cain, we're talking upwards to half of the total points that you have available to spend. And that's not even getting into the support units like the Farseer or Farseer Skyrunner that you might want to bring with you as well. So yes, while D-cannons are still very strong, I do believe that you need to use them in a precise manner. You can't just throw them in any list. You need to make sure they synergize with other aspects of your army. However, if you are able to do that and they are able to synergize and support your army, then they will be great into a lot of matchups that you might see in competitive play. All right, everybody, that is going to be it for today's video. Thanks for watching. Let me know what you think about D-cannons in the comment section below. I know they're a little bit expensive right now, and hitting on 4s does kind of suck, but even so, they are some powerful pieces, and they do hit very hard. So let me know what you guys think. I personally am more of a fan of aspect warriors now. That's just my personal style, but I can't deny that D-cannons still look pretty strong. So anyway, thank you so much for watching, and thank you so much to all my patrons and supporters who have supported the channel over the last year and a half and some. We're coming close to 2 years now, and my God, has it been a wild ride. If you are interested in supporting the channel, I have free trials activated on the Patreon, and that will grant you permanent access to our Discord community, which is a community of Eldar players and enthusiasts who love talking about strategies, tactics, and of course, hobbying. I will leave the link in the description below. I'm also an Amazon affiliate and have a channel store page, so if you want to grab some discounted Eldar miniatures on Amazon or grab some Eldar-inspired apparel on the channel store page, I will leave those links in the description also. All right, everybody, that is going to be it for today's video. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you guys next time. Have a good one, everybody. Peace out.